Okay, well, we have the pleasure of hearing from Alan Coates, who's one of our Rare Books librarians who has made this selection for us. So, and there'll be an opportunity for people to take a closer look at the book and ask questions, so on and so forth. So over to you, Alan.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Before I start, I was just promising Chris that there is actually some music in there. It's hidden. I promise not to reveal it, and I absolutely promise not to sing. But to go to the books. The symposium, which begins at lunchtime and has been organised by Henrika, will celebrate Nigel Palmer's enormous contribution to the study of medieval German religious and literary culture. Nigel was a scholar who moved with ease between manuscripts and the printed book. And it is his work on the early printing on which I would like to focus for the next 10 minutes or so, and is the subject of the little display here. Nigel was a great friend of the Bodleian, as Chris mentioned earlier, and I am delighted to have the opportunity to bring along some items highlighting Nigel, the scholar, the user, the cataloguer of our collections here in the Bodleian, and donor to them. I will concentrate on, especially on Nigel's involvement with the Bodleian's Incunable Catalogue, Bod-Inc, which was published by OUP in 2005, and since then made electronically available as Bod-Inc Online. When he was setting up the Incunable Cataloguing project, my predecessor, Christian Jensen, brought together a team of academic advisors to assist the project team, and he invited Nigel, then fellow and tutor in German at Oriel College, to be one of those advisors. The main purpose of the board was to give assistance to the project cataloguers, particularly in areas where they themselves had less expertise. As you can imagine, having at our disposal Nigel's knowledge of all matters medieval German was a huge benefit to us. More generally, too, Nigel and the other advisors were able to assist the project team with the sort of information which users might expect to find in the catalogue, and the best way in which to go about presenting it. It goes without saying that the work of Nigel, the scholar and user of early printed books, very much informed the work of Nigel, the advisor and cataloguer. The German Cistercians and their books formed a long-standing interest of Nigel's, and it is particularly pleasing to be able to show our copy of the 1487 Missale from the Cistercian Abbey of Eberbach. Nigel, in his book on the Cistercians and their books, our copy of which I have next to the Missale, which was published in 1998, highlighted the additions to the calendar of the Missale and the various inserted slips of manuscript, one of which is on display, which provided evidence of the Eberbach provenance. Beyond the purely advisory role, Nigel also had a very hands-on involvement in Bod-Inc. Christian was well aware of Nigel's interest in blockbooks, and he asked Nigel if he would like to catalogue these for Bod-Inc. Although only a small number in the library, 8 in all, they were an important part of the collections, and by their nature they were complex and difficult to describe. Nigel agreed to do this, and he produced a series of excellent catalogue entries, working in collaboration with our colleague Andrew Honey, and Andrew will talk more about one of the block books this afternoon. In the meanwhile, I have brought up another one, a nicely coloured German apocalypse from about 1472, which contains a cycle of some 92 pictures. On display is the opening covering Apocalypse 20:10 to 15, in the upper section, the lake of fire and brimstone, and in the lower, God judging the dead from the Book of Life. And we have Nigel's catalogue entry in an off-print next to it. As we neared the end of the cataloguing, I broached with Nigel one other small but slightly problematic aspect of the Bodleian's early printed collections, namely the 42 single sheet items. These were a mixed bag of maps, book plates, devotional illustrations, printed book covers, etc., etc. All of them interesting, few of them dated or located precisely. Some were parts of books, some not, and some perhaps more the sort of items you might expect to see in galleries or museum print rooms. Whatever, they all warranted cataloguing. And Nigel very gamely took this on for us, and the catalogue descriptions he produced of these single sheets, which took him into fields well away from his normal activities, recusancy in England, early Italian printing and other areas, should, I feel, be regarded as a model of how to deal with such early printed ephemera. Here are two of the single sheet items. The first, which Henrika is photographing at the moment, is an English woodcut. Its host manuscript dates from the late 15th to early 16th century and contains an otherwise unrecorded Latin devotional text. The book comes from Sion Abbey, the dual Bridgetine house in Middlesex. And the woodcut is one of three in the volume, all probably made at Sion in the closing years of the 15th century. And the opening I've chosen is the striking and apparently unique one, showing death and the Last Judgment with all the appropriate imagery. Next to this is a very different item. Two woodcuts printed side by side, providing a decorative book cover. The works inside the book are two works on medieval logic, printed in Venice, one in the early 16th century, one in Incunable. The book cover, however, was printed in Ferrara, and this is shown, apart from anything else, by the roundel on the centre of the upper cover, illustrating Saint Maurelius, the patron saint of the city. So here we have Nigel as scholar, user and cataloguer. What about Nigel as donor? In 2011, he generously indicated that he intended to leave to the Bodleian a 16th century printed book. And here it is. It is a copy of the Büchlein von den Peinen, printed in Strasbourg in 1506 by Bartholomeus Kistler. Nigel purchased it in about 1980 from Thornton's bookshop on Broad Street, over there. Or at least it was, because of course it is now no more than a distant memory to those of the older Oxford hands of us who are here. The book is not quite complete. It wants the first leaf, but this has been supplied with a substitute from another copy. The Büchlein contains a German text illustrated with woodcuts describing the vision of Lazarus in the other world. It is a composite, in fact, of two sources, the German translations of Tundalis and of the Lazarus version in the French Calendrier des Bergers from the 1490s. Nigel described it as a curious assembly of visual and textual materials, but it was one which was very much part of his own interests, not least from his own D.Phil thesis on Tundalis in the 1970s. His copy also has interesting annotations. And then there is the binding. And I'm simply going to leave you to make of that what you will. I know what I think, but you can have a look and see what you think. It's a rare little item. Nigel was only aware of 3 copies. One in the Bavarian State Library in Munich, his own, and we're pleased to say that this can now join the 3rd copy, which had itself been here in the Bodleian since 1834, when it was part of the bequest of Francis Dowse. Nigel commented in 2011, "I feel that to have 2 copies of a book such as this, especially when one has early annotation recording a particular way of reading a text, is something a library such as the Bodleian can probably tolerate." And the answer to that, of course, is yes, we can certainly tolerate that. And of course, more than that, we can be extremely pleased about it. And indeed, we can be most grateful. For, at least to my mind, putting Nigel's copy here, next to that of Francis Dowse, places this little book and its donor firmly in the best of bibliographical company.